This week, we welcome Mike Lloyd, Chief Technology Officer at Red Seal, to discuss the cybersecurity forecast, cloudy with a chance of turbulence. In the leadership and communication section, how to be a visionary leader and still have a personal life, 5 mistakes CISOs make in their board presentations, what are CISOs focused on for next year, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Arduous legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter and compete in today's business climate. CyberSaint ingests data from your existing tech stack to deliver unprecedented, patented automation and visibility into enterprise risk and compliance. Don't get left behind. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs and business leaders of Fortune 500 and more partner with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSaint BSW. As a security leader, CyberArray for Teams was built to make your job easier. Are you struggling to measure your team's skills proficiency, provide critical or relevant role-based training, or translate training investments into meaningful business outcomes? CyberArray for Teams is the industry's #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CyberArray. CyberArray for Teams. Skills development solved. Visit cyberarray.it/solved to solve your training problems. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 195, recorded November 9th, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in a sunny, cloudy, snowy Colorado. And my co-hosts are mixed up today. I've got Jason Albuquerque first, sitting in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island.
I'm loving it. I can actually have a day where I can take any cigar I want out of the humidor.
And that's because Paul is remote today.
The gatekeeper's not here.
So he's out of his shop at the house. Paul, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks. I'm here in my remote studio with Jason smoking, hopefully, my really good cigars while I'm not there.
I didn't do too much damage, I promise. I like to enjoy the really good ones with you, Paul. So.
Oh, yeah, that makes me feel better.
I would have done.
While you smoke my best
Jason.
cigars.
Yeah, right. I'm just saying, I would have done it. Would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Have a question for one of our illustrious hosts, someone from the Security Weekly team, or wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly crew and the community? Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher, sign up for our mailing list, and join our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. In our upcoming webcasts and technical trainings, you will learn why you should stop trying to discover and classify data, how to thwart attackers using deception, and how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program. Visit securityweekly.com/webcasts to see what we have coming up, or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view all of our previously recorded webcasts. This segment is sponsored by Red Seal. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal. No stranger to the show, Dr. Mike Lloyd has more than 25 years of experience in the modeling and control of fast-moving complex systems. He has been granted 21 patents on security, network assessment, and dynamic network control. He is the Chief Technology Officer at Red Seal. Mike, welcome back to Business Security Weekly.
Always a pleasure to come talk to you guys. I'm glad to be here.
We have fun, and we switch up the hosts with you every once in a while. Like the first time you were on earlier this year, I was on vacation, and then the last time you were here, Jason and Paul were out. So not only do we get to see you multiple times, you get different hosts to talk with you.
And all of them excellent folks who can roll with a conversation. So, maybe we can handle some turbulence today.
Yeah, when we were putting together this segment, I was reminded of this conversation Paul and I were having a week or so ago. We were talking about shadow IT, and we're like, yeah, we don't use that term anymore. It's now all about digital transformation and cloud assets. And, what's interesting is when we think about that for a second, it's like, wait, what does that mean to our security programs? What are some of the new challenges? We used to call it shadow IT, but now it's like this thing we all embrace and want to adopt and move forward with, but it creates a whole new set of challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great way to launch into this because, we used to talk about shadow IT a lot. And now, why isn't that a relevant term anymore? Well, because people are supposed to behave the way that we used to criticize as being shadow IT, right? This is part of the change that the cloud has brought along, that it's expected that independent teams will make independent decisions about what infrastructure they're going to use. If I take a big step back, the history of IT generally has been this swinging pendulum between centralized and decentralized, right? It started with mainframes, and everything had to go through the central mainframe, and everybody started to hate the mainframe admins, and so they ended up inventing the PC. And what was the point of the PC? Well, you didn't have to go work with those mainframe guys anymore. You could stick it out on people's desks, and maybe you get a printer, and you get a little bit of productivity there, and you get out of the clutches of those central guys who are a problem for you. And we didn't call it shadow IT then, we called it the PC revolution. But then we got those things under control because they started the network.
We also call those mainframe operators priests as well, which I think is kind of a inkling of just how much power they thought they had and why we wouldn't want to deal with them.
Absolutely. No, yeah, it was the saintly priesthood, and you had to submit your batch jobs to them like so many burnt offerings and hope to get something back. So, it was crazy. And then, these little PCs, of course, they started to network, and then we began to learn this thing called the network effect, where all of a sudden we started to get new security behaviors because these little PCs were all starting to connect together, and we got viruses. And nowadays with the pandemic going on, we know plenty about how bad viruses can get. So we had to get some central control again. And what did we do? We covered all those PCs in agents, and we built up a whole new security stack on top of that. And that gave us central control again. And that caused a new round of friction, right? Now we weren't the mainframe priests anymore. We just had central IT security who was seen as Dr. No. Right? You could never do what you wanted to do on your local PC anymore because there were so many agents and so many controls. And so the revolution of going to the cloud is just the pendulum swinging back out again away from central control. And as you said, right, shadow IT was a phrase we used in the previous stage of the pendulum swinging, but now that it's back out, and individual business units are supposed to go and innovate and go push their stuff into the cloud of their choosing, which means it's not shadow IT, it's normal behavior for all these different teams to make these different decisions. And that's part of what causes all this turbulence for the security team, because, well, you no longer have an ability to say, those people are behaving badly, we should stop having that shadow IT. They're expected to go and innovate and move fast in the cloud, leaving you in security in the unenviable task of needing to catch up again and start getting all your controls reinvented one more time to go and control all this crazy, fast-moving cloud stuff.
Yeah, at the end of the day, throughout each phase, we're just spawning new religions, keeping with the conversation, right? That's all we're doing. We had that level of progress, but at the end of the day, I take a step back and say the risk is still there because I look at it from a risk perspective, right? Whether you call it shadow IT, whether you call it digital transformation and business units moving to the cloud rapidly, the risk is there, and we need to be ahead of that risk as far as security leaders within the organization.
Absolutely. I think that's the only mature perspective, right? There's a lot of enthusiasm with any new technology, right? There are people who get very, very enthusiastic about, it solves all our problems, right? All AI hype and all that kind of stuff. But in cloud, what was it? Well, if you don't run the data center yourself, if you have Amazon or Google or whoever run it for you, then you won't have all those infrastructure mistakes. You won't really be able to have a vendor-supplied password still on a router or a firewall, because there's no router or firewall there. It's all virtual cloud stuff. And that wipes out a collection of security mistakes. What does it do? Exactly to your point. It just replaces them with a brand new set of security mistakes, like the world readable S3 bucket, which is not a problem we had 10 years ago, right? So yeah, the religions come and go, and there are these reformations and counter-reformations as the pendulum swings back and forth. But ultimately, from a risk point of view, people can still get tricked. mistakes still get made in infrastructure.
Sure.
And so your job in security is to train the people and harden the infrastructure, which means you need to actually understand that infrastructure, which is difficult when it's trying hard to run away from you. That's what's been happening over these decades. It's always this attempt by IT innovators to get away from the clutches of central security.
Sure.
And you have to chase after them.
Yeah, and then add to that the business pressure, right? I mean, from my perspective, we're not only getting that pressure from the innovation side, but from the business side, right? More and more, my CFO is looking for flexibility. So they want to move subscription versus I need to pay the big nut up front, right? They're looking to consolidate platforms. Why do we have so many disparate systems everywhere? Why can't we just consolidate? So there's a lot of business pressure coming down on CISOs as well to make different decisions and move to these type of platforms.
Right. Yeah. If you take a big step back and think about, if you think cynically about the cloud, or skeptically, I suppose is a better term. If you think skeptically about it, what is it? It's a way of renting other people's computers.
Yeah.
Well, since when is renting financially a good move? Why are CFOs keen on a rental model? Who thinks it's better to rent a home rather than own a home, right? A CFO can see the clear benefits in owning a home. Well, of course, you want to rent your home when you know you're going to move a lot.
That's right.
Well, what that's really saying then is the success of cloud for meeting that business pressure, for giving the business what it wants, is really ultimately an indictment that we're bad at predicting what we're going to do next in IT.
Yeah.
If we could forecast our usage of compute, then we'd still actually build big honking data centers and fill them up with complicated computers. And we used to do that. Why don't we do it anymore? Because it's cheaper to rent? What? How could it be cheaper to rent?
Yeah.
Well, the only way it can be cheaper to rent is because we were really bad at forecasting how much compute we needed.
That's 100% right? And there's also a balance that I've learned, as I started engaging with the CFO and really being engaged with that business unit, they have a challenge where they need to balance their EBITDA. Right. So they're looking at operational expenses and their ability to depreciate, right, with assets that we own. And my CFO will make decisions based on EBITDA numbers, right, on whether we go subscription or whether we actually purchase right out. So there's that sway within, the financials of an organization that'll make that decision. Right. And that's having that strategic seat at the table where you can have that conversation with your CFO and say, all right, do we actually want to buy assets, or do we want to go to a subscription model, or do we want to move to the cloud? How do we want to handle this? And it's all based on the financials of the organization at that point.
And you have to be sophisticated about that, but then you also have to be sophisticated about the infrastructure that these IT teams are going to use. Because ultimately, we've clearly seen the security team can't really dictate, no, we're only going to use this cloud over here that we've approved.
Right.
I don't know any organizations who are successfully doing that. Most organizations I see, to your point about shadow IT, have embraced the idea of each business unit should make its own independent decisions. So now I'm talking technically rather than the EBITDA analysis. But when they make those independent decisions, that means in a large organization, there's always some team buying every cloud service known to man. Right? Amazon's 120 different cloud PaaS offerings, and every one of Google's different offerings, and all the way to Rackspace and Oracle and all these folks who sell this stuff. And when you're deliberately from CFO and CEO down forcing that kind of behavior, where we're trying to innovate, we're trying to use these fast-moving cloud services, which means we make independent decisions, which means the organization buys everything ultimately, then security is really in a jam. Because from a security point of view, you now need to understand every one of these cloud fabrics to understand what your risk posture really is. And that's the real challenge we're getting into. It's the cloud in some sense has wiped away certain classes of errors that we used to have a lot in, we still have in physical networks. You can't make those mistakes in cloud, but you can make a whole new class of mistakes, and you can make them in so many different lingos, so many different languages, because there's a technical matter. Every one of these cloud providers is inventing and reinventing the same stuff with new names. And so that's the real challenge that I find people facing, right? The conversations with the CFO about EBITDA, you can, get the dummy's guide to accounting and CFO practices. You can figure out how to have a meaningful conversation with the CFO about whether to rent or to own. But to keep up with all the cloud, you can't do that. You need some other way of pulling together all of those cloud languages to deal with, the turbulence we talked about in the title of this, right? One of the problems with cloud is the turbulence you get from the rate of change and the way that every one of these cloud infrastructures is different.
Yeah, being able to centralize all of that into a single view, right? Because again, if I understood my risks, okay, and I had a complete visibility across my entire infrastructure, which includes multiple clouds and some on-premise stuff and a few other things. Now I can start to put a plan together to say, okay, here's where my risks are. Here's where I need to put in a plan to mitigate risks. But getting that central picture is way easier said than done.
Absolutely, yeah. Because of course, Amazon will give you great tools for understanding your Amazon footprint, and Google will give you some tools for the Google footprint, and Oracle will give you some for your Oracle footprint. But they're all specialized to their own thing, and they all speak in their own languages. So now it's almost like there are 20 different languages that you suddenly need to speak to pull together that centralized picture, and that's pretty seriously challenging. So that's where you need to be able to think like a linguist. You have to think about how many of these different fabrics you're going to learn about, because one guy calls each of these virtual networks a VPC. Another vendor, Microsoft, likes to call them VNets, right? Same rough idea, a bit of fabric where an IT team can do their work. Oh, and then you have Kubernetes coming along, which is the greatest leveler now that's trying to be a uniform way, not too successfully yet, but they're being very successful. What they're not being very successful at is making the languages uniform across these folks. And Kubernetes has its own language again of nodes and pods, and it's all about the same thing. It's all about saying, okay, well, I need some virtual infrastructure. Oh, and it gets complicated because they need to be able to talk to each other. So I need a way to interfere between them. And you call that a security policy group, an endpoint policy group? How do you keep track of the differences between this kind of effectively firewalling or network control and that kind over there? Because all these segmentation and micro-segmentation languages, they're all different. And we weren't doing all that well managing legacy firewalls 10 or 20 years ago. And now we've got to take on all these new ways of expressing A can talk to B but can't talk to C, all in different vendor languages. How do you pull together that big picture so that you can see, for example, blast radius, so that you can see if somebody broke into one of your cloud services, where else would they be able to go? Amazon can tell you whether or not your Amazon service looks like what you thought you were buying, but they can't tell you, can somebody who's now broken in move laterally across to your other VPCs and all of your other cloud footprint, right? They're not in the business of mapping all of you. They're just in the business of selling you more Amazon stuff.
And hey, by the way, do all that segmentation without disrupting the business.
Right.
Because if we disrupt the business, security gets a bad name, right? So,
right. We had a hard enough time segmenting our physical networks, right? We knew that it was a good idea to potentially limit the blast radius, but think about the challenge we had with our physical networks, and now we're dealing with virtual networks and various providers all around the potential world. I can't even imagine how you pull all this together.
To me, the word is between, right? It's always been about, whether you believe that the world should have two blobs in it, the users and the applications, or whether it should have three blobs, with the blob in the middle being the controls that you put between, right? Of course, once upon a time, we stuck big fat firewalls at the edge of our infrastructure, or at the edge of the data center, and that was our between control. That's not what it looks like in the cloud anymore. But if you let your DevOps teams run with the whole thing and tell them to go and deploy infrastructure as code and put all the security controls in there, good luck understanding what they're doing, because they don't talk the same way as the security team. They don't talk the same language. Okay, but now what's the alternative? Well, if you want to control between some team over here who you don't really trust and some team over there who have something important you need to protect, how are you going to insert a control between them that isn't run by either team that you don't trust? And there are ways to do it, but it increases your cloud footprint complexity. And it wasn't all that easy to control to start with, right? So just betting hard on microsegmentation hasn't worked out that well, because of the classic problem that if you let the guy who builds the compute nodes run the security on the compute nodes, what does he do? Turn it off every time he's got a problem.
That's right.
Right?
Or he escalates root privileges. Or he spins up containers as root, or puts in all kinds of other controls that maybe have more access than they need, because maybe he doesn't care about security. He's making sure the environment's up and running, and he has his performance stats.
So now you need controls between, and how are you going to do that? Well, you can, and in a sense, I think Kubernetes may make this a little bit easier, because Kubernetes comes along and gives DevOps teams a play space that's pretty much wide open. It gives each one of them a little sandbox or a little walled garden, these namespaces that Kubernetes is keen on, and building applications that way. It gives the DevOps guys something they want, but I think from a security point of view, it's good, because then the Kubernetes stuff that's inside the cloud provider, that's inside Microsoft Azure, or inside Google's cloud platform, right? Wherever that Kubernetes stuff is, it's living in something wider. And that's important, because that's now a place you can put a firewall. You can buy your favorite Palo Alto image or Checkpoint image, and you can run it in the surrounding VPC fabric, as long as you're capable of mapping your Kubernetes, your firewalling and segmentation in your cloud infrastructure as it relates to the other cloud infrastructure that you own, right? Your VPC peerings and so on. So that's a tall order. I mean, it is a good way forwards. And I think Kubernetes can be seen as a good thing from a security point of view, because it gives these people sandboxes. And now you can stand outside the sandbox and say, okay, now I need to control what goes in and out of the sandbox without having to get involved in the day-to-day DevOps, because those guys will indeed behave the way they've always behaved since the mainframe days.
Mike, how do our policies evolve to handle these particular cloud deployments and applications? Because I think our policies, when it came to things like firewalling, what can talk to what, it was pretty easy to develop a policy. You know, we've got everyone in the office, the firewall is going to block everything from the internet, and we're going to allow certain things out. And the policy may say that you need to manage and monitor that. But when we get into things such as cloud, now there's trust relationships between all sorts of different objects. How do we back up to the policy level and make sure that it's getting attention?
Right. Well, I mean, and of course, the first point is to even know what the objects are. Sadly, I mean,
Right.
it's the same point about, you know, in real estate, they talk about location, location, location. Well, for us security people, we know what it is. It's inventory, inventory, inventory. If you don't even know what's there, you're not going to have any hope of understanding security policy. So you've got to start by understanding which assets are there. Now, cloud does, if used correctly, does give some nice new tools, because as people roll out machines, they start tagging them. There's this useful language about pets and cattle, right? If you look at the way DevOps people behave, they talk about the distinctions between the kinds of machines that they operate. And they have this distinction between the pets and the cattle. It's a really useful idea. It's about 10 years old in DevOps circles. I'm finding in security circles, it's still not really that well understood. And it's an important change that I think we have to adapt to. So the pets and cattle idea is, you know, old computing machinery that we've been talking about in the old pendulum swings back when we had big data centers, right? Those are pets. We give all those machines names, and we know their names, and we give them care and feeding. If they get sick, we patch them up. We take them to the vet, right? That's how pets are treated. Cattle's a different world, right? And the world of cloud computing is very often organized around these cattle who are not really given names. You don't want to name the cow you're going to eat, right? And if the cow gets sick, bit of brutal fact, but you kill it and you get replacement cattle for your herd. And that's the way cloud fabric is run. And this distinction of the way we treat pets and the way we treat cattle is really helpful illustration, because when you're trying to figure out your security policy, you even think about that policy differently for pets and cattle. It's not that cattle takes over the world, right? Again, the enthusiasts for cloud think everything works in this brand new way, and it really doesn't. The mature cloud teams realize, okay, we can do a lot of our utility computing with a cattle model. We can use Lambda services and all these kinds of things that allow you to spin up and spin down instances every microsecond, but that's not a very good way of running a customer database, right? So if your database of customers or sales records is really precious to you, don't treat it like cattle, treat it like a pet. Now,
except when the lines blur, and I knew someone who was a little crazy and had a pig, and its name was Supper, so it was like a pet and food at the same time.
I know a guy who kept fish and called him Sushi and Nigiri.
Yeah, right, there you go.
Similar choice. It didn't work out too well for the fish. So you know, it's a useful way of thinking about the way that pets and cattle are different. And you know, we don't, absent your friend, normally name the cattle. And we manage these things differently. And of course, your security policy needs to be different. One of the great things about cattle is they are so disposable from an IT point of view. And this means you don't have to worry about things like patch management. You don't patch these compute instances in a well-run cloud with a really good CI/CD pipeline. You just, if you find a security flaw, you go back to the shift left people, you go earlier in the dev chain, say, okay, let's code up a patch, and then you just roll it out through your CI/CD pipeline and wipe out all of the weak machines and replace them with new fixed ones. That's very cool. It doesn't solve all your problems, because you do still end up with some pets. And you need to know the difference. So if you can't in your environment see which machines you should be treating as cattle and which machines you should be treating as pets, getting the treatment wrong, you know, it's going to be very, very expensive. If you take every one of the cows to the vet every time they got something wrong, that's going to waste an awful lot of time and energy. So, you know, it's not a fully detailed answer of everything you need to do to control segmentation, but I think it's part of what we have to learn in cloud is to learn these new terms, learn these new ways of thinking, and set up policies appropriately around, I need to have more protection, more security around the pets, because that's the precious stuff. And the cattle, maybe I don't have to worry so much. I don't have to be friction on the business, like you were talking about, right? You need to be able to design a looser segmentation policy so that those people can innovate, so they don't get you fired for being friction on the business.
But
Mike,
that answers my question, Mike, I think in a very great way, because what you're saying is when you define your security policies and ultimately your procedures, you need to classify things differently than you did in the past when you're using cloud technology.
Yeah, no, that's right. If you really get familiar with what Lambda services and things like that do, you're really not going to put a security perimeter around a Lambda service. The trick with that stuff is nobody knows where it is. Even your own DevOps guys don't know where the compute is happening. So that kind of compute, you don't need to build a wall around it. But when it stores the data at rest, back to the old models of risk, right? Wherever you keep your crown jewels, well, that you need heavy perimeters around. So you need good security controls in one place. You don't need them in another. And you've got to be able to tell the difference. And that gets us back again to this point about you need to speak all of these languages, all of the cloud languages. And that's hard. Of course, I make software. And part of the point of that kind of software is to help people speak all these languages, right? That's what I do all day. I teach software how to know all the differences about how Azure does things, how Google does things, how Amazon does things, which is why I end up realizing, all these things are kind of different and it's kind of difficult to keep track.
Does it also change the way we have to think about visualizing our assets? Because to your point, cattle come and go. And so is it worthwhile to visualize every individual cattle, or is it more important to visualize the ranch that the cattle are in? To what level of granularity do we have to think about visibility in this cloud world, Mike, to say, well, I know it's a service over there and what's running in it. The individual things really don't matter, like a Lambda function, but I need to know that it's at Lambda, and when it's done with Lambda, it goes here. How do we start to visualize those changes now?
Yeah, that's an awesome point, right? The ranch point you brought up there is I think a really excellent way of deflating this idea of microsegmentation. That if we just had enough protection around every cow, then every cow would be safe, right? Good luck doing that at scale, right? That is not how it's going to work. You're not going to know the roles of all the cattle. You're not going to know what their business purpose is. Yeah. You need to be able to take a step back and see the perimeter of the ranch. That's where I'm suggesting that you can treat some Kubernetes namespaces almost like ranches, and what you have to do is control the fence at the edge, right? And you can do that by using node ports and services and all these definitions that again, more lingo you have to learn in Kubernetes if you want to secure it. So the idea of how to wrap the policy around and then how to visualize whether you've done it right, that's the real challenge. So one of the things I've found is every customer wants just one map of their whole world, and I can deliver those. I spend a lot of my time building maps for people. That's what I've been doing longer than I worked at Red Seal, just building maps of complicated fabric. And you can do that, but there's a difference between the best map to understand your security posture technically, so that technical folks can understand, oh, look, here's an attack pathway, here's how a bad guy can move around, versus the right kind of map to have a conversation with one of the other teams. When you're trying to motivate somebody outside security to change their processes, right, that has to be a different kind of conversation. And I'm finding, especially in cloud, the DevOps teams are highly specialized, right? Only in security do we have this problem of we need to know all of the languages. And so we need to normalize to get one map that can show all kinds of farms. And maybe it's a beets farm over there and a cattle farm over here. And maybe this farm over here keeps chickens. The details of each one of those farms is different. But we need a way to pull it all together so we can understand the land use. Right? And so you need an integrated technical map. I find layer 3 maps of how packets forward is a good lingua franca, right? Because everybody still exchanges packets over the internet. So if you can show a packet forwarding view, that can really help you understand the lay of the land. And that's what you need as a technical person inside security. But you need a different map if you're going to go talk to the chicken farmers, right? Or the guys who run, they just are in Azure and they use this service and that service and that service. If you show them the technically accurate map, they actually don't get it because they've converted into this other way of seeing the world that is based on their DevOps pipeline. And so they know about cattle, and they know about images, and they know about things like namespaces in Kubernetes. And none of those things are trivially drawable on your map of how things communicate. So you actually have to have different maps. This is the same way that, of course, we know in the real world, regular maps, the maps you use for driving are different from maps I use when I'm out flying. I'd like to do that on the weekends. Or, if you want to go hiking in the mountains, you need a different kind of map than the driving directions map. And so you need different maps for different purposes. So you can make a universal map of the entire fabric for use inside security. But when you're talking to those DevOps teams, you need a specialized map that captures what they need to know about their kind of fabric, or they just simply won't understand. Because if you show them what looks like a conventional network map, they just don't think about that kind of fabric anymore.
So we used to have road maps. Mm-hmm. We had topographical maps, right? Different types of maps to serve different purposes.
Exactly right, and that's what you have to do. But it still goes back to the same basic fundamentals, right? It still starts with inventory. So your first map is just to draw all of your cloud estate, all of the ranches and farms of all the various flavors. You have to pull all of that together into one map first, because none of those other teams are going to do it for you. No other team outside security is obsessed with completeness the way we are inside security. We're the ones who need the complete map of everything so we can understand lateral movement, blast radius, these kinds of concepts. So we have to get our complete end-to-end map of all the fabric first, and then build the specialized map, because those guys who run chicken farms only want to see stuff that's about keeping poultry. They don't want to see a generic map about geology or something. That's not their kind of map.
Correct. Very interesting. Jason, Paul, any additional questions while we have Dr. Mike with us today?
No, I think the concept of having that broad map is great, right? I mean, it doesn't only get you the understanding across, and I'm going to relate it back to the business units, but it gives you something that you can take to, let's bring it back to the farmer, the conglomerate that owns all the farms, that owns the chicken farm, the cattle farm, right? All of that, because that's the conversation I need to have. I need to be able to take this technical map, translate it to the business, have business conversations about risk, so that way I can get additional funding, additional people, additional applications, additional controls, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I mean, that perspective is very important, because for me, I have to get buy-in from all these stakeholders. So I need the owner of the chicken farm to have my back. I need the owner of the cattle farm to have my back, so that way when we're going to the owners, we can have the right conversation together.
Some of those farms, of course, are polluting, right? They're full of noxious chemicals in their silos.
That's right.
And you need to be able to find all that. Well, you're not going to get that without the map, so you can go back and get the funding to go clean up your act on your corporate Superfund sites.
You got it.
Mike, it's always a pleasure to have you on Business Security Weekly. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here. Thanks, guys.
If anyone wants to learn more about Red Seal and its cloud visualization platform and capabilities, please visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.